right now can share that with your friends. The webcast is in English, even if the speakers are speaking another language. It's translated. As you know, here in the room, everything is being translated between English and French, live interpretation between English and French. And when there's another language, that is also being interpreted, and you can use your headphones and find the relevant channel. Those who are tweeting, the hashtag is hashtag GS14, and the Twitter handle is @GenevaSummit. And of course, the Wi-Fi here in the conference room is the CICG is the network, and the username is Geneva Summit, initial cap G, and Human Rights, initial cap H. Are we good here? As I said when we opened today's summit, all of our speakers today are gold medalists in moral courage, and we just had the Olympics, but indeed today with us are world champions of courage and conviction. One of them, we've decided to award an actual award, the Geneva Summit Courage Award, and to make the introduction and the presentation, I have the honor and the privilege to call up the chair of UN Watch, Ambassador Alfred Moses. Thank you.
Thank you, Hillel, and yes, good afternoon. In April of 2012, a little less than 2 years ago, the eyes of the world were focused on Beijing, more precisely on the American embassy in Beijing, not on Tiananmen Square, not on the meetings of the Central Committee, the Government of the People's Republic of China, not on Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who was visiting, or Secretary of the Treasury Timothy Geithner. They were in Beijing to talk about North Korea, trade, commerce. The eyes of the world were focused on a political refugee who had sought asylum in the American embassy. Chen Guangcheng from Dongshi-Gu, who at an early age lost his sight due to illness, taught himself to read by Braille, educated himself, received a law degree, and then became a spokesman for the oppressed in his province, women subject to sterilization and forced abortion, local citizens of China deprived of their human rights. For his great crime, which was described as destruction of public property and disturbing public order and peace, he was sentenced to 4 years in jail. When he was released from jail in 2010, he was placed under house arrest with a concrete wall surrounding his residence, a wall 2 meters high, in order to contain this threat to public property and public peace in China. Courageously, in the spring of 2012, Chen Guangcheng escaped over that 2-meter-high wall. Being blind, he fell down numerous times. Was driven to Beijing by Miss Hay, of whom we know nothing today. Found refuge in the American embassy, and there he was, the focus of the world's attention. His great crime being an advocate for decency and human dignity. Under a negotiation, the terms of which are still secret, he was allowed to leave the embassy and seek medical attention in a hospital in Beijing, accompanied by the American ambassador, whose political counsel is here today. He then learned that his wife and 2 children were being oppressed, and he sought the right to leave China. He, together with his wife and 2 children, came to the United States. He is a scholar at New York University and one who continued to speak out on behalf of human rights and human dignity. He became the focus once again of the world's attention, and deservedly so. What do we learn from his example? We learned, as Erwin Cutler said earlier, under certain circumstances, it simply costs too much to keep true heroes in prison. The cost to the oppressors, to the country that has imprisoned them, is greater than whatever benefit they can gain from silencing such persons. And we also know that there are things that the United Nations can do that it doesn't do and won't do until the countries of Asia, Africa, and Central and South America join with democracies elsewhere to speak out, to do what they can, not to bemoan the fact that there's so little they can do. We had yesterday a meeting at the Canadian Embassy, hosted by Ambassador Goldberg, who's here, representatives of Mexico and Morocco, an African country, and a country that has much in common culturally and otherwise with Central and South America. If the countries such as Morocco and Mexico and their neighbors in Asia, Africa, and Central and South America will join with the democracies of the world, the voices collectively will have an enormous impact on those countries that up till now have sought to ignore the mandate that we all have as human beings to free the oppressed. To recognize Mr. Chen and his courageous wife, this group of 20 NGOs is conferring upon him its first award for courage. Mr. Chen has been described as a moral hero who has transformed the world. He is truly a moral hero. We look for the day when the world is transformed. Mr. Chen, would you and your wife come up, please, and receive the Courage Award from the 2014 Geneva Human Rights Summit.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. 这里 OK。帮我下去。
好，各位来宾，各位朋友。
Hi everyone. Thank you, Ambassador Alfred Moses. With the help of friends, I'm here in Geneva today. And if I had not escaped to Beijing at that time, I wouldn't be standing here today. Friends from different countries in the world can understand my experience back then. I'm very happy to have the chance to attend the annual Geneva Summit. At the same time, I'm honored to receive the Geneva Summit Courage Award. Thank you again, UN Watch friends. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And thanks to friends from all over the world who support human rights, democracy, and social justice. Here, we can freely host conferences, discuss existing problems, and talk about solutions. But currently in China, hosting conferences is the Chinese Communist Party's privilege, or else it would be illegal gathering. Even meeting friends for dinner or hosting a birthday party is considered protests by the CCP and will be stopped or even taken away by the police. On the surface, Chinese public security is readily available. And the Chinese Foreign Ministry also said that China is a country governed by law. But in reality, public security is completely controlled by the party. Politics and Law Commission decides the investigations and the punishment of cases. However, Politics and Law Commission belongs to the party and completely not under the control of the government. In China, the party controls everything. A community organization party overrides the law. There is no difference between imperial power and a party that overrides the country and the law. The party uses violence, but ironically, it always speaks of using peaceful and constructive ways to resolve domestic and international disputes. One of the important missions of United Nations is to look over human rights. As a member of Human Rights Council, members should be the model of human rights. China is not only part of the United Nations, but also a member of Human Rights Council. But what we see is that in 1998, the CCP already signed International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, but it is still not ratified after 15 years. Beijing human rights activist Cao Shunli was attacked because he meditated for several months to co-author China Human Rights Report and National Human Rights Action Plan in 2013 for United Nations Universal Periodic Review. Last year, September 14th, she was imprisoned in the airport on her way to attend United Nations Human Rights Conference and refused hospital treatment for her. On the 20th of this month, she was sent to emergency room for rescue. The result is unknown because the visitors were stopped. Not only does CCP disrespect citizens' human rights and fails to comply international law, it consistently uses its membership to challenge international law and undermine international order. We must have the courage to stop this behavior. Recently, due to technology advancement and Chinese citizens' growing awareness, CCP's lies are harder to cover. In order to maintain the one-party autocracy, the Chinese communists spent a large amount of money to build the network of Berlin Wall. For several years. The expense was more than military spending, up to over 700 billion yuan per year. There is no government that treats its own citizens like enemy in the world. In the past 7 years, CCP spent around 70 million yuan of stability maintenance to illegally arrest my family. When I was illegally in house arrest, friends from all over the world came to the village I live in to give support and help. However, they were arrested and beaten for this. Some people's arms and ribs were broken from the beatings. Others' money and belongings were taken. I plan to allow you to watch some videos that shows how friends who supported me were beaten and arrested. However, due to technical problems, I will briefly describe how I was in house arrest and how friends were beaten and arrested for helping. If a society doesn't have freedom of speech, there is no truth. Without the help from friends, there is no freedom. I wouldn't have today's freedom without the help from my friends. Friends such as Gao Zhicheng, Guo Feixiong, Liu Ping, Xu Zhiyong, Ding Jiaxi, Yuan Xiaohua, Yang Ling, Guo Chen, and Wang Koma are still in prison. Countless of Chinese citizens were pressured and threatened for fighting for human rights and freedom. We need everyone's constant help to support this. My nephew, Chen Guangcheng, who helped me escape, was beaten by government officials in his house. In order to save his own life, he picked up a knife for self-defense, but was sentenced 3 years and 3 months in jail for intentional assault. He is now imprisoned in the same jail I was in. However, the real criminal committers are not punished. Although I was promised a thorough investigation, it didn't happen. CCP doesn't mean China. Now, CCP has lost credibility in China, but continues to use violence to maintain power. With the power comes to an end. There is no need to fear illegal and illegitimate power. And it won't be too long before it ends. We must understand that brutal dictatorship is a product of evil. It is a common enemy for all. And it is still the biggest threat to the value of human civilization. We must work together to end this. The biggest fear is fear itself. You are stronger than me. Don't be afraid before we start. Here, I urge everyone to work together to promote the establishment of a democratic international organization, to spread democracy, defend human rights, and fight against repression of the people. At that time, friends say, "We will not stop until you are free." Now, I am free, and I want to say, in return, I will not stop until China is free, democratic, and respects human rights for all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This is a struggle that we cannot lose. Let's join hands and work together. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
OK，好的，我先给你翻译。OK。
I'd now like to invite up Madeleine Brot from Télévision Suisse Romande, who has graciously agreed to interview our awardee. Merci beaucoup.
Vous avez en fait sur le...
Can the interpreter in English just say a few words? So
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
French. Can the interpreter in French? We're going to have Chinese to French. Can the interpreter in French say a few words? Can the Chinese interpreter say a few words? We're getting there. Can the Chinese interpreter just say a few words, testing, so we can find the right channel? It's good? Okay.
On peut y aller? Can we begin? I am Madeleine Brot. I'm in charge of the International Bureau of the Swiss television station. Now, I know China a bit because I was in Hong Kong in 96, 97. I spent a lot of time in China at the time. I met with other dissidents before Mr. Chen Guangcheng and Wang Dang, who are also in the United States. So it's a very great pleasure for me to meet Mr. Chen. I've heard a great deal about you. Now, you did not give us a great deal of introduction about yourself, so I'd like to remind the audience that might not know you that you are a lawyer, that you are self-taught. Can you hear me, Mr. Chen? Can you hear me for the interpretation? Mr. Chen, you're a lawyer. You trained yourself, huh? You're self-taught. You didn't have formal education, and this is lucky that in the Chinese system that people like you, lawyers, can defend the oppressed, those who are weaker than you in the Chinese system. But what is paradoxical is that when you defended the disabled, you were considered a hero in the Communist Party. But when you changed your issue and started focusing on the single child in families, and when you started to defend villagers against forced sterilization, you became an enemy for them. Now, how can you explain that? How is it that you became considered a danger?
At
the very beginning,
At the very beginning, when the peasants' human rights were abused, there were not much lawyers who could help them. So initially, I was just using these very basic laws to fight for them. But when one-child policy came to my attention for human rights violation, it was all over China, and the village I live in is one of the worst.
À partir de là, vous avez été...
From that point, you were imprisoned for 4 years. Now, I think that was a source of great concern for the Chinese authorities. Were they afraid that you would lead an organized movement, that you would challenge their power?
I think that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to cover all the crimes they did. if they feel that what you did is threatened, they will try to destroy you and arrest you. If you're trying to say something true, they will see you as an enemy. Sometimes even if you don't say anything, they will seek you for arrest because they want to use this as an advantage. So I think this is a autocracy's common trick.
Pour parler du Parti communiste chinois, mais pourtant vous n'appelez pas à la révolution, contrairement à d'autres dissidents, vous n'appelez pas au renversement du Parti communiste chinois. Pourquoi au fond?
You have not called for the communist system to be overturned. Why is that?
At
that time, we think the same as the other Chinese citizens. The laws that were made by CCP, you have to be the model of the law that you created. So at that time, we were thinking that they should naturally commit their law. But actually, in reality, they will, even because they are an autocracy, they would just do as the common autocracies. They will illegally arrest you, but if you oppress, they will come at you. They will use their own way to come and try to oppress the citizens who are trying to speak out for human rights. I can't hear you.
So other citizens who try to rise up have been thrown into prison. We've heard a lot of narratives, very disturbing narratives about the conditions in Chinese prisons. Now, for people like you lost your vision when you were very young. Well, can you tell us what it was like during those 4 years in prison? Were you given different treatment than other prisoners in Chinese prison?
Of course, when I was in prison, I couldn't see. And when the CCP were trying to destroy me, it was a lot more convenient for them. At least when they beat me, they would think that I don't know who is beating me. But for other people who can see, it wouldn't be a problem. It would be a problem for them. They use several different ways to terrorize for people who try to go against them. At that time, for example, the prison guards, when they were beating the prisoners, they would be observers. They would be standing far away and think that no one would know. But suddenly, their cell phone rang, and I would know that there was a prison guard who was in charge of this. And they know that prisoners didn't have any ways to communicate with outer world. So they would use these kinds of methods to terrorize people. And by that time, you would hold no hope for autocracies and such governments.
Et ensuite, lorsque
Then afterwards, when you were finally released, it wasn't really a true release because you were under house arrest. You were made a prisoner in your own home with your family. Those were also very difficult years, marked by violence. And that's what finally pushed you to flee, I believe.
明天就会让你哈腰，后天就会让你蹲下来，再后天让你坐下来。那么，即使你最后趴下，他还会站在你的身上踩你一脚，这就是独裁者他的本性。所以在当时，即使我被放回家以后，也仍然实行了比监狱不知要严格多少倍的这种严酷的折磨和非法拘禁，这也就应了中国另外一句话吧，叫物极必反。正是因为他们做的。
vous avez choisi donc de partir.
So you chose to escape to the United States. And you are in exile, so to speak. Other Chinese dissidents have done this. There were the Tiananmen students, for example. Can you not hear? So now you've chosen to be in exile in the United States. Like other dissidents before you, Chen Guangcheng, Chailing, there's a long list. YKZ. Now, progressively, we've seen that they've disappeared from the public eye. Are you confident that you will be able to carry on your struggle from the United States and still have an influence in China?
It happened.
Yes, I think that it happened. But now the situation is changed. At that time, when at that time, the only way to communicate within the country is to write a letter. But now it's different. It's a era of technology. Even no matter if you're in Tokyo or Washington, D.C., if we want to know what's happening inside the country, how can you compare it to at that time? No matter in the middle part of Shandong, you can help the activists and those who are oppressed to fight for human rights. With the distance, you will find that distance is no longer a problem. If we work hard and work together, then location and distance is no longer a problem. The only problem is that we don't have enough confidence. I feel that we need to, if we continue to do this, China will change. And I hold a firm belief that these days will not be far.
So whether if
anyone forgets the past leaders or not, it's not because we are avoiding the topic, but because it has other causes.
Now, this is a very heavy price to pay, nonetheless. So, do you hope to be able to return to China? Do you think it will be possible for you? that the Chinese authorities will allow you to re-enter China?
可以听到刚才问题有没有听清楚？要再翻译一次吗？就他是说您逃出来的，有这么多的代价，然后说，在以后你有没有打算回到中国？而且您觉得中国政府有没有可能让您再回去？
I think until now, the Chinese Communist Party is still using the same excuse as they did in 2012. They said that I'm studying abroad in the US, and they are not changing their reason as to why I'm in the US. I'm sure that China will change, and I'm sure that I'll be able to go back to China freely one day.
I will be sure that I'll be able to get back to China or get out freely. So soon in the future, we'll be free to move in and out of China. Thank you.
So you hope there'll be a change towards democracy, and that will allow you to return during your lifetime over the next 20 or 30 years. Is that it?
没有。
No, it's not that tragic. It's not that in the future China will change. Now China is already changing. There is already a change in China, as I mentioned already. At this time in China, people are looking for human rights and democracy. According to statistics, hundreds have gathered in China, and it is becoming common at this moment. And now the party has moved its attention from overseas democratic movements to attention to domestic movements. The fear is that more and more people are becoming confident and that there are more people into this. To a certain extent, there is a large change. Why do some people not know a lot about this? That's because they are too focused on the officials and not the lives of citizens. I know that the lives of Chinese citizens are not the same as years before. They are becoming more aware of human rights issues and democracy. They know that without rule of law, there will not be freedom. And that will affect their children in the coming generations. We shouldn't be listening to the autocracy.
Listening to the autocracy.
That's true. What we often say is that over the past 10 or 20 years, the Chinese authorities have allowed millions of people to emerge from poverty and to learn more, to have access to knowledge. And you yourself are an example of that, a living example, because you were able to move around, have access to classes. But there have been a number of social and economic inequalities at the same time. It's a many-tier system now. There were reforms, but not everyone was able to benefit. So doesn't that create a rather explosive situation?
问题是。
请让主持人再重复一下问题。
Ok. Ok. Je vais continuer en français.
I will continue in French then. As you yourself said, thanks to economic development, millions of Chinese have been able to emerge from poverty in the countryside and cities, have access to better education. But that has also created a great deal of injustice and tension between those who have been able to profit from the reforms and those who have lagged behind. Now, isn't that a danger for China? Will that not create an explosive situation?
I
think what you said earlier, the first point that Chinese government gave its citizens more freedom nowadays, I disagree with that saying. I think that freedom is something that they fought for and it's what they earned. Especially these days, Chinese citizens use internet and technology to let the public know about the human rights issues in China. We are trying to use different strategies of movements to gradually force the government to give in. If you say economic development, everyone is developing, so it's not development as a country. For certain periods, there are economic developments, but you have to look before that. When China opened its markets, the economy was actually going downwards. So the route, as you said, does have a bad effect on China.
Based on it does have a bad effect on China.
Et progressivement à la fin de cet entretien, mais je vous...
We're winding up our talk now, but I did have another question I wanted to ask. I wanted to hear about your family. They've stayed back in China. Have you heard from them? Are you concerned about their security? Are you fearful that they will be hit with reprisals? This is a commonly used technique used. Action taken against those who leave, to take action against the family that remains behind.
I think it's a common characteristic of the autocracy. When something happens, they will use your next generation, your children, your family, your parents as a threat. And they wouldn't stop. As I just said, my nephew is still in the prison that I was in. The CCP is using different weapons to threaten his relatives. And there is injustice. Their threat still exists. And ever since I left, the threat and the terror they do to them is still, that it never stopped. And they're using several methods to watch the village I'm from. Under this autocracy, as a human rights activist and a common citizen, there's a certain extent of a difference between an activist the threat of being a human activist and is far higher than a citizen. After my village is being destroyed, there's no way that you can seek for help. When they're taking away your human rights and take away your belongings and force your wife to go to the hospital for surgery, there is no threat to them. But on a different perspective, for human activists, there is still some concerns.
Have you had any word from your family? Are you able to speak to them from time to time? Can you call them, or has all contact ended?
Yes, we do call, but usually I don't use cell phones because everyone knows that cell phones are being listened. Other methods might be a lot better.
Ok, merci.
Thank you. I think we're going to adjourn this session soon, but perhaps we can take a few questions. Would anyone like to ask Mr. Chen Guangcheng a question?
Oui. Ok. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. We have a question here from a member of the public. Now, this refers to a trade treaty that Switzerland and China have recently signed to facilitate trade between the two countries. Now, this person is asking you what you think about the fact that the treaty was signed without any discussion of human rights issues.
First, I don't know about the concrete details of the agreement. But in general, I feel like any kind of trade, people have to be consistent with the fact that human rights cannot be sacrificed. By sacrificing human rights, it would be sacrificing long-term benefits and rights.
Cette question a été signée de Monsieur.
Mr. Pierre Blanchet has asked this question, who wants to know what you think about the authorities who refused to meet with the Dalai Lama. Is the Tibetan issue one of concern for you?
Tibet is one of the many problems of the CCP. About Dalai Lama, I have talked to him in several meetings. He never said that he never said that Tibet will separate from China. If I remember correctly, it happened from 1984, but the autocrats, the Chinese Communist Party, pretend not to hear that and talk about Dalai Lama and Tibet independence. But we need to let the people know that Dalai Lama doesn't have this, did not ask for this.
Thank you so much, Chen Guangcheng. We'll stop here. I'd like to thank you for coming to Geneva and having talked to us about your life in China, all the hurdles you've encountered. and in your view of the future of China, specifically respect for human rights. And we hope that this will become reality in the next few years.
谢谢，谢谢。
Thank you. Thank you.
Please stay.
OK，
We have a special edition right before we break for lunch. Two very small things that are important. You know, our conference, the summit, takes months of planning. Thanks to Ariel Herzog Hadida, who's our amazing coordinator, and we plan in advance and bring people from all around the world, and many struggles to get them visas and passports. It's a big headache, and it's difficult to respond in real time to things that are happening right now, but we try. And we're of course deeply concerned on what happened last week in Ukraine, people massacred in the middle of Kiev, and of course what's happening in Venezuela on our TV screens, seeing an entire city shut down from the internet, and all kinds of brutality from the government. And as you may know, the protest leader, Leopoldo Lopez, is sitting in a jail cell right now, and we were able to get a special message from him and his family, thanks to his aunt, who lives here in Geneva, and who's spoken with the family and is going to read us a brief message from Leopoldo Lopez, the jailed protest leader in Venezuela. Julieta, please.